Greetings, wanderer of the night. Tonight, we invite you into a journey unlike any other voyage through the most mysterious corners of human memory. Have you ever stood in a place for the very first time, only to feel with certainty that you have been there before? It's that fleeting sensation, strange and haunting, is called déjà vu. But what if it is not merely a trick of the brain? What if it is a whisper from eternity, an echo of lives lived long ago, or even a glimpse of destiny written in the stars? Across the world's oldest civilizations, Sumer, Egypt, Greece, Rome, India, China, the Maya, the Norse, this riddle was not ignored. They clothed it in myths and chants and sacred philosophies. For some, déjà vu was the voice of gods. Others, it was the blood of ancestors, or the eternal cycle of rebirth. Join us now on this long epic, a timeless lullaby told in the voice of myth itself. Let the rhythm of forgotten stories carry you to sleep as we uncover the eternal circle, hidden within déjà vu, and perhaps within you. In the first silence of creation, when the earth was young and the heavens unmeasured, humankind stood in awe beneath the endless canopy of stars and felt a trembling they could not name. For though their eyes were new, though their lives were but the first drops in the vast river of time, their souls stirred with recognition. They gazed upon the constellations as if they had seen them long before. They walked paths that felt familiar, though no feet had touched them, and they carried in their hearts a shadow of remembrance without origin. Thus was born the riddle that would haunt all ages, the strange echo of memory without past, the sensation of return without departure, which in later tongues would be called déjà vu, in the valleys of Sumer, where rivers Tigris and Euphrates braided the soil and ziggurats rose like mountains of clay. The priests of Enki declared that the soul was no fleeting spark, but a wanderer of eternity. They taught that when a shepherd swore he had guided his flock upon that meadow before, though his youth was scarcely begun, it was the whisper of his own spirit recalling a path from ages lost. The scribes pressed into clay tablets the story of eternal return, saying that the gods allowed fragments of forgotten lives to pierce the veil of the present, so that man would know he was more than flesh, he was a vessel bearing the weight of countless dawns beside the Nile, where pyramids pierced the sky and the temples of Karnak stretched like stone forests. The Egyptians spoke of Ka and Ba, the vital essence and the roaming soul. They believed that when a mason lifted his chisel and felt he had already carved the line upon the stone, it was because his Ba had labored there in another body, another age. To them, déjà vu was the trembling of eternity's script, a reminder that life was not a single passage, but a series of journeys woven together. The tombs were not monuments of death, but gateways for the soul's return, and every shiver of recognition was proof that the circle had never been broken. In Hellas, where philosophers sought truth in marble courtyards and oracles spoke from the vapors of Delphi, the mystery was wrapped in reason, yet never dissolved. Plato told of anamnesis, the doctrine that all knowledge was but remembrance of truths once known in the realm of forms, before the soul descended into mortal clay. When a man stepped into a chamber, he had never walked and felt its shadows familiar. It was the stirring of that higher memory, the oracles. Déjà vu was the trembling of fate's thread, the warning that the fates had wound the moment twice upon their loom. The poets sang that time was not a line but a circle, and the soul, brushing against itself again and again, felt the repetition as a haunting certainty. Through Rome, the riddle marched, borne upon the sandals of legions and the scrolls of philosophers. In the Forum, skeptics mocked it as folly, claiming the mind stumbled upon its own frailty. Yet even emperors, crowned with laurel, paused in their palaces when vision seized them, and they swore they had ruled those halls before, though no crown had yet touched their brows. To augurs and priests, déjà vu was an omen, proof that history itself spiraled like the coils of a serpent, devouring its tail and beginning anew upon the bones of empire. In Persia, where fire burned eternal upon the altars of Zoroaster, the Magi spoke of the world as a battle of dualities, light and darkness entwined forever. They believed that Deja Vu was a spark of Ahura Mazda's flame, leaping from age to age and striking the same vision twice upon the heart of man. It was proof that creation was not chaos, but circle, that every age, every soul, was bound within the eternal fire. In India, the sages of the Vedas and the seers of the Upanishads spoke of samsara, the wheel of life turning without end. Them, Deja Vu was no puzzle, but a revelation, a glimmer of the soul's long journey across lifetimes. When a child entered a temple for the first time and walked its corridors with perfect ease, the elders said it was because his spirit had bowed there in a body long returned to dust. The fragrance of incense, the echo of chants, the shimmer of lamps, these were not new, but remembered from lives past, as karma bound one existence to the next. In the heights of Tibet, the Lama said the same Deja Vu was the thread of karma tugging at the soul, reminding it of the unbroken road behind, far to the east. In the kingdoms of China, sages of the Tao declared that life was the flow of the way, eternal and returning. To them, Deja Vu was harmony, the resonance of the soul with cycles that stretched beyond sight. When a scholar crossed a bridge and felt he had lingered there before, it was because the Tao had curved his spirit back to the same current, carrying echoes of what once was. Buddhists taught that it was the veil of reincarnation torn for an instant, while in the shrines of Shinto, the Japanese believed it was the kami, the spirits of ancestors, whispering memory through the living dot in the north, where sagas were carved. In Fire and Ice, the Norse spoke of Mimir's well, from which all memory sprang. They said that when a warrior felt Deja Vu upon the battlefield, it was because he had drunk unknowingly from those waters, tasting visions of another turning of the world. For the Norns did not weave time as a straight thread, but as a pattern repeating upon itself. Every winter, every battle, every life returned as snow returns to the earth. Among the Celts of the Misted Isles, Druids spoke of the soul as a traveler, reborn again and again in endless spirals, carved spirals upon stones, as signs of this truth. When a bard sang a song he swore he had sung before, though the melody was new, it was because his spirit echoed its own music from forgotten ages. Stones and rivers themselves were said to hold memory, and when the soul touched them, Deja Vu awoke as the land spoke back. In the jungles of the Maya, where pyramids climbed toward the stars, scribes inscribed upon their codices the great wheels of time. They said that Deja Vu was the soul remembering its place in those cycles. For nothing was ever lost, only repeated. Each back dawn returned, and men lived again the steps they had taken under suns long extinguished. In the highlands of the Inca, the priests of the sun spoke of Pasha, time and space woven together, and they said that Deja Vu was the voice of that weaving, reminding the spirit of its place within the eternal cloth. In the dream time of the aboriginal peoples, the ancestors had sung the world into being, and every rock and tree held their memory. When a hunter felt he knew a ridge though he had never walked it, it was because his steps followed the ancient song lines, paths sung by the spirits at the dawn of creation. Deja Vu was the echo of those primal songs, vibrating still in the veins of the living, in the wide plains of Africa, where drums carried the rhythm of earth itself. Griots spoke of time as a circle, and the living as forever bound to their ancestors. When a youth entered a clearing and felt he had stood there before, the elders told him he walked in the footprints of those who came before, their spirits pressing memory into his blood. Deja Vu was the communion of past and present, the dead, breathing once more through the hearts of the living. And among the tribes of the Americas, beneath skies pierced by eagle cries and guided by the Great Spirit, the Lakota told of the sacred hoop, the circle in which all things return. When a dreamer opened his eyes and felt he had dreamed the waking world already, it was because he had touched the eternal now, where past and future meet. Where in their vision, Deja Vu was the proof that all life was one circle, unbroken and unbreakable. Thus, across continents, across centuries, across every tribe and kingdom beneath the heavens, the mystery walked with humankind. It was called by many names, clothed in many myths, but always it bore the same shape, the the sudden knowledge of what should be unknown, the haunting return of what should never have been lived. Some named it fate, some rebirth, some the whisper of ancestors, some the will of the divine. But in all tongues, in all ages, it was the same echo, the eternal reminder that man was bound not to a single life nor to a single time, but to the vast encircling memory of existence itself. Then hear how the echo moves further, weaving its thread through the forgotten temples and wind-swept plains of the ancient earth, for the tale has no ending, only returns, in the hidden lands of Anatolia, where the Hittites carved treaties into stone and lifted temples to their storm gods. The priests declared that Dacia Vu was the trembling of divine law, for to them history itself was written in heaven long before men raised their walls. And when a warrior strode through the gates of a city and felt he had walked them before, it was the gods opening the page of his destiny. In their belief, nothing came by chance. All was set upon eternal tablets. Dacia Vu was the brief crack through which mortals glimpsed their fated lines. Among the Phoenicians, whose ships stitched together the edges of the Mediterranean, sailors spoke of Dacia Vu as the sea's own memory. When they entered harbors for the first time, yet felt the piers and stones familiar, they said the waves were whispering to them, for the ocean itself remembered every journey and carried it in its tides. To the mariners, memory belonged not to men alone, but to the great waters. And Dacia Vu was the sea lending its remembrance to the traveler in the high places of Canaan and the deserts of Israel. Prophets lifted their voices, saying that life unfolded according to the Eternal's decree. To them, Dacia Vu was a sign of covenant, a proof that the Almighty had written every moment before the birth of man. When one felt that a place, a word, or a gesture had already been lived, it was the faint shimmer of destiny itself, the scroll, unrolling just as it had been inscribed. What seemed repetition was revelation. A glimpse of divine order piercing the veil of time, in Thrace and Phrygia. The devotees of Dionysus and Sibylle entered sacred frenzy, dancing in the moonlight until body and soul dissolved into ecstasy. There, they claimed, the veil of time tore, and men remembered what they had never lived. The torch, the mask, the song each felt known, though newly beheld. Dacia Vu, they said, was the spirit drunk on eternity, recalling the steps of rituals, performed across countless ages. For the gods were not bound by hours, but by the endless rhythm of birth and death, madness and renewal. Upon the steppes of Scythia, horse lords thundered across endless grass, and their shamans spoke of memory, as inheritance carried in blood and bone. When a rider felt Dacia Vu in the midst of battle, it was not his own memory, but the gallop of ancestors who rode beside him unseen. For them, the moment of repetition was proof that no man fought alone. The spirits of lineage breathed through his flesh. His recognition was the echo of their unbroken ride across generations. In the kingdoms of Ethiopia, where mountains touched the sky, and kings traced their blood to Solomon and Sheba storytellers, said that the land itself bore memory carved into stone and soil. When a man looked upon a valley and felt he had known it always, it was because the land remembered him, and in its silence it shared its memory. Dacia Vu was thus the communion of earth and man, the whisper of landscapes calling back their own eternal knowledge. In the forests of Gaul and Britannia, where druids walked among oak and mist, Dacia Vu was the spiral of existence itself. They inscribed the triple spiral upon stones, symbols of return, and taught that when a person felt uncanny remembrance, it was the soul brushing against its own former passage. The land was alive, the stones and rivers bore memory, and those who entered them touched the pattern again. Thus Dacia Vu was not illusion but truth. The spiral opened, and the traveler walked once more upon the same eternal curve. Among the Olmec and later the Aztec, who raised pyramids as stairways to the heavens and fed the sun with sacrifice. Time was not linear, but a serpent devouring its own tail. They believed the cosmos itself had been born and destroyed across ages, each cycle repeating in shadow of the last. When a warrior entered battle and felt the clash of swords already known, it was the blood of a former son burning through him. Déjà vu was the memory of other worlds, carried across cosmic depths, echoing still in the veins of the living, in the vast lands of the Amazon. Shamans drank from the cup of visions and declared that déjà vu was the dream world breaking into waking life. The hunter who paused on a forest path and swore he had already walked, it was remembering his spirit's journey through the dream. For all life was doubled, one in waking, one in dream, and déjà vu was their meeting point, the crossing of shadow and flesh. In Polynesia, where navigators read the stars and swells as open scripture, voyagers said that déjà vu was the memory of ancestors speaking through the blood. When a man landed on a distant shore and felt the sand beneath his feet as known, though he had never stepped upon it, Deja said it was the lineage guiding him, the spirits of voyagers past, granting him remembrance. A time was not bound to one man, but to the chain of generations. And déjà vu was the sea of ancestry flowing through the present. And so through every land, beneath every sky the riddle spread. In deserts and mountains, forests and oceans, men felt the same shadow, the sudden recognition of what should not be known. They called it fate, they called it rebirth, they called it destiny or the whisper of gods, but always it was the same. Kings and shepherds, prophets and warriors, sailors and shamans, none escaped it. It was the proof that time was not a straight path but a circle. It's not a single thread but a woven pattern, and man was forever bound within its eternal echo, in the frozen vastness of the far north, where the aurora danced like ghostly banners and the earth lay bound in endless snow. The shamans of the Arctic told of souls that wandered before the body. They believed déjà vu was the sign that the spirit had already traveled, moving faster than flesh to scout the path ahead. When a hunter later walked into the clearing and felt he had stood there before, it was his soul whispering, for it had already beheld that place in silence, circling through the unseen. To those who listened to the drums of ice and sky, déjà vu was the overlap of two journeys, the one of the body and the one of the soul. Among the Siberian tribes who listened to the roar of fire in their yurts and the howls of wolves beyond, shamans told that each man was many spirits woven together. When one spirit strayed into another world and returned, it brought back fragments of sight and sound that did not belong to the waking self. The sudden recognition of a moment was the collision of realms, the voices of hidden spirits pressing into mortal memory. Thus déjà vu was the mingling of worlds, a reminder that no life stood alone, but was bound to many layers of being. Across the wide steppes where horsemen thundered, the Mongols believed the eternal sky the Tengri watched. Overall, when a rider felt déjà vu upon a field of battle, it was said to be the will of the blue heaven reminding him that his destiny had already been written in the stars. Every clash of hooves, every arrow loosed, was a return to patterns decreed long before. For them, déjà vu was not confusion, but confirmation, proof that no man could outrun the design of the eternal sky. In the high plateaus of Central Asia, among temples raised to forgotten gods, sages taught that the soul's path was not straight but coiling like a serpent. When a monk felt déjà vu as he lit a lamp and saw the shadows fall in familiar patterns, it was because the soul circled back upon itself, brushing past its own former light. To them, the repetition was a glimpse of samsara's wheel, vast and inexorable, carrying the spirit round and round through centuries uncounted. Among the peoples of Africa, where deserts rolled like oceans of sand and savannas stretched beyond the horizon, elders told that the ancestors walked always beside the living. When a child stopped in wonder and declared he knew the place, though never before he had seen it, the griots said it was the voice of his forebears. Their memory pressed upon his blood, their journeys became his visions, and déjà vu was the touch of their unseen hand. Time, in their songs, was a drumbeat repeating, and the living danced always with those who came before. In the ancient rainforests where pygmies hunted beneath towering canopies, the people said that the forest itself remembered each tree, each riverstone, each bird's cry was part of an eternal memory. When a hunter felt déjà vu as he followed the game, it was the forest whispering its knowledge through him, guiding him by the memory of countless hunts already written in its heart. To them, déjà vu was not merely human, but the voice of the world itself, reminding man that he was a child of Earth's long memory. Among the tribes of the Great Plains of the Americas, where buffalo thundered and the sky arched like a great dome, the vision keepers said that déjà vu was a glimpse of the sacred hoop. All things, they taught, moved in circles, the seasons, the lives of men, the beating of drums. When a warrior saw the firelight flicker and felt he had seen it before, though the moment was new, it was the hoop turning, bringing him back to the same point in the eternal circle. No life was lost, only returned. No moment was wasted, only repeated in the dance of the Great Spirit and among the peoples of the Andes. Where stone terraces clung to mountainsides and the sun was worshipped as father, déjà vu was woven into the fabric of Pasha time and space, as one shepherd climbing the peaks might feel the wind strike him with familiarity, as though he had stood there 1,000 years before. The priests said it was because the loom of the world had folded his spirit back upon the same thread. To them, déjà vu was the weaving itself, tightening its pattern, binding past and present as one. Thus, from the ice of the north to the jungles of the south, from deserts of fire to oceans of storm, the mystery wore many cloaks but spoke with the same voice. It was the ancestors' whisper, the spirits' wandering, the gods' decree, the land's own memory. Some feared it, some revered it, some sang of it by firelight, but none could escape its chill. For to feel déjà vu was to feel the echo of eternity pressing upon the fragile present, reminding all mortals that they were not merely travelers of one road, but wanderers in a cycle unbroken, in the shadowed valleys of Mesopotamia, where Assyrian kings raised palaces with lion-guarded gates. The seers who read the stars declared that déjà vu was the voice of destiny itself. They taught that when a man looked upon a moment and felt it had already been lived, it was because the heavens had written it twice upon his path. The constellations above were tablets of fire, etched with every breath of mankind, and déjà vu was the faint trembling of those stars, letting the mortal glimpse his fate already fulfilled. In Babylon, where the hanging gardens shimmered with flowing water and palms, scribes pressed into clay the belief that dreams and waking life were twin streams of one river. They said that déjà vu was the dream remembered within the day, a place or vision, glimpsed by the soul in sleep long before the body arrived. When a merchant entered a market and felt he had walked its alleys before, though it was his first step there, he was told that his soul had wandered there in the night, testing the road before daylight's arrival in Arabia, beneath desert skies, where caravans carried spices and incense across endless sands. Tribesmen spoke of jinn beings of smoke and fire who walked unseen between men. Déjà vu was said to be their whisper, casting shadows of memory into the heart. When a traveler paused upon a dune and felt the certainty that he had stood there already, though the sand was forever shifting, the elders said it was the jinn playing with his sight, revealing that time was not man's alone, but belonged also to those unseen spirits. In the sacred groves of Greece, the followers of Orpheus sang that the soul was immortal and bound in chains of rebirth. They believed that déjà vu was the memory of those other lives, surfacing like music half-heard in the distance. To step into a temple and feel it already known was to hear the song of the soul repeating a melody older than flesh, drawn from the depths of eternity. Among the Romans, the augurs who read the flight of birds spoke of signs in every movement of the world. They said that déjà vu was one such omen, for when the mind trembled with familiarity, it meant the gods were showing the echo of what was to come. In their view, the repetition was not a trick, but a prophecy, a shadow of the future, mistaken for the past, for the gods often revealed their designs in riddles, and déjà vu was among their most subtle messages in the far lands of the Celts, where mists veiled stone circles and druids whispered secrets beneath oaks. Déjà vu was said to be the meeting of the soul with the land's own memory. Stones, rivers, forests all were alive, bearing witness to ages long past. When a man entered a glen and knew its shape without knowing why, the druids told him the land was calling to him, sharing its ancient remembrance. In this way, every experience was a weaving of human spirit with the eternal spirit of place. And déjà vu was the moment when they touched, across the jungles of Mesoamerica, where the Aztec and the Maya raised pyramids like mountains to the gods. Priests declared that time itself was cyclical. Turning upon vast wheels, déjà vu was not mystery, but proof of this cycle, the reappearance of moments already lived beneath earlier suns. When a man felt the repetition of a sight or step, it was because he had walked that moment in another age, beneath a different sun that had long since fallen into darkness. The cosmos itself was repeating, and men were caught within its turn. In the islands of the Pacific, navigators who read the waves and the stars said that déjà vu was the song of the ancestors flowing through the blood of the living. When a voyager landed upon a new shore, yet felt the sand familiar, the elders declared it was because his forefathers had stood there, and their memory rose again in his veins. To them, time was not severed between generations, but continuous. And déjà vu was the bond of blood speaking across centuries in the vast deserts of Africa. The Tuareg told that the dunes themselves shifted in patterns that mirrored eternity. When a traveler felt déjà vu upon the horizon, it was because the desert remembered, and in that moment, man's spirit touched the memory of the earth. For nothing was ever wholly new in the desert. Every wind carried echoes of the journeys of those who came before, in the sacred lodges of the plains, where the drumbeat rose like thunder. The Lakota told of the sacred hoop, the eternal circle, in which all things turned. Déjà vu was the proof of this circle, the soul walking once more upon the same step, returning to the same vision. To them, it was not confusion, but confirmation, that life, death, and dream were not separate paths, but one ring, endlessly circling, endlessly repeating, and so across the ancient world. The mystery walked with men and women of every land. It wore the mask of fate, of spirit, of dream, of ancestor, and God. Some trembled before it, some bowed, some sang of it in riddles, but none denied its weight. For déjà vu was the echo of eternity, striking the heart of man when he least expected, reminding him that time was not his to master, but an endless weaving in which he was forever caught in the dawnlands of Egypt, where temples blazed with golden light and priests traced sacred hymns upon papyrus. Déjà vu was spoken of as the breath of Osiris carried from one life into the next. They said that when a laborer raised his hand against the same stone for the first time, and yet felt his hand had done so before, it was because his spirit had carried the memory across the veil of death. The Ba, the roaming soul, was never bound to silence. It passed from life to life, like the Nile from flood to flood. And each déjà vu was the glimmer of that eternal passage breaking into the present, in the shadowed courts of Babylon. Where astrologers charted the movements of heaven, déjà vu was interpreted as the proof that all of existence was governed by celestial rhythm. For if the stars repeated their cycles with unerring regularity, why should not the soul? When a man entered a marketplace and felt its sounds and colors already known, it was the stars themselves repeating through him, their endless rotations mirrored in his brief perception. To the Babylonians, déjà vu was no accident but the harmony of heaven echoing in mortal flesh. Among the Persians, beneath the towers of Persepolis, the keepers of fire taught that déjà vu was born from the eternal conflict of light and shadow. They believed each soul, as it journeyed, gathered sparks of fire that leapt from one age to another, and a vision or place seemed remembered though unseen. It was because the flame had burned there before, scattering its sparks into the spirit. Such moments were seen as signs of the cosmic order, a reassurance that the world was turning as it must. Locked in eternal battle, yet bound to eternal renewal. In Greece, the followers of Pythagoras whispered that the soul was a harmony, bound to the music of the spheres. They declared that déjà vu was the resonance of that harmony, striking the same note twice. Just as a lyre returns to familiar chords, so too did the soul return to familiar visions. When a philosopher felt déjà vu within the agora, it was the eternal music ringing again within him, uniting the mortal and the divine in a single chord of recognition. The Romans, who inherited the philosophies of the Greeks, yet clothed them in power and empire, debated whether déjà vu was omen or illusion. Augurs, reading the flight of birds and the entrails of beasts, claimed it was a shadow of things to come, glimpsed too soon. To them, déjà vu was prophecy mistaken for memory, the gods revealing their will in subtle disguise. Yet others scoffed, saying the mind itself faltered, stumbling upon its own echoes. Still, even the conquerors of the known world paused when seized by it, for no legion, no law, could banish the sudden chill of recognition that had no place. Among the Celts, whose mistbound lands were strewn with stone circles, déjà vu was bound to the eternal return of the soul. Druids taught that time was a spiral, curving endlessly, and each life brushed against its own reflection. When a warrior entered a glade and felt its paths were already walked, he was meeting himself. Upon the spiral, passing the echo of his own former breath, the stones themselves, they said, stored memory, and when man touched them, the memory surged into him, awakening déjà vu like a spark struck from flint, far beyond. In the jungles of the Maya, time was kept upon sacred calendars that stretched into ages uncounted. They did not believe moments vanished, but that they returned, endlessly woven into the cycles of suns. To them, déjà vu was proof of this eternal recurrence, a man recalling a step he had walked beneath another sun, another age, another world. When a priest felt déjà vu ascending the steps of a pyramid, it was because his soul had climbed those same stones in another cosmic cycle. It would again when the wheel turned once more. Among the Inca, who raised their empire upon the shoulders of mountains, déjà vu was tied to the great weaving of Pasha, the unity of time and space. When a shepherd felt déjà vu gazing upon the peaks, it was the loom of the world folding back upon itself, showing him the thread of eternity. For to them, life was not many threads but one cloth, and déjà vu was the glimpse of its pattern, tightening around the soul in the dreaming of the aboriginal peoples. Déjà vu was no mystery but a sign that the ancestral songlines were alive. They believed that every step of the land had been sung into being by spirits, and when a man felt he had walked the same path before, it was because he was following the ancient song exactly. His recognition was not his own, but the echo of the first singers whose voices still resounded through rock and tree in Africa. The griots told of ancestors walking with the living, and déjà vu was their presence. It was the hand of the dead pressing upon the shoulder of the living, guiding him with memory not his own. When a hunter felt déjà vu as he entered the clearing, it was because his ancestor had stood there and the forest itself remembered. In this way, the living never walked alone. They carried the memories of all who had come before, rising unbidden in sudden moments of return, and in the lodges of the Americas, where smoke curled toward the Great Spirit, the Lakota spoke of the sacred hoop, the eternal circle. Déjà vu was their proof, for when a dreamer opened his eyes and felt the world already known, it was the circle touching itself, past and future folding together. No life was new, no vision wasted. All returned, endlessly woven in the hoop. Thus, the riddle stretched across Earth's face, carried by kings and peasants, priests and hunters, seers and sailors. It bore many names, clothed in many stories, yet always it was the same, the sudden remembrance of what should never be remembered. The haunting echo of eternity pressing against the fragile present. It was proof to some that the soul wandered, from life, to others that the gods bound man to fate, to others still that the ancestors whispered in silence. But none could deny its weight, for déjà vu was older than empires, older than temples, older even than the first words carved in stone, an eternal shadow cast upon the heart of man, in the frozen reaches of the north, where fjords cut deep into stone, and the aurora spread like curtains of fire across the sky. The Norse told that all memory flowed from the hidden well of Mimir. There, beneath the roots of Yggdrasil, the world tree, lay the waters of knowledge and remembrance. When a warrior gazed across a battlefield and felt the clash already lived, it was because he had unknowingly drunk from those waters, tasting echoes of other turnings of the world. The Norns, who wove fate with their silent hands, spun not in straight lines, but in curves that crossed again and again. Déjà vu was the soul brushing against its own former passage. The snow returns each winter, as the seasons repeat without end. In the shadowed forests of the Slavs, where rivers wound, like serpents and oak groves held ancient shrines, seers spoke of Nav, the realm of ancestors. They said that when a man paused in sudden recognition of a moment, it was because the dead walked beside him, whispering their memories into his blood. To them, déjà vu was not the soul remembering itself, but the inheritance of lineage pressing upon the living. A child who felt a place known without reason was carrying the visions of forefathers, their voices mingling with his own. Thus memory was not bound to one body, but 2 generations, an unbroken chain echoing through time. Upon the wide steppes of Scythia and Sarmatia, horsemen thundered with the speed of storms, and their shamans declared that the spirit rode beyond the body. When déjà vu struck a rider in the midst of battle, it was because his soul had already galloped across that same plain in the company of ancestors. To them, the world was not divided into past and present, but into layers of eternal riding, each overlapping the other. Déjà vu was the moment when hoofbeats aligned, past and present, striking the earth as one in the volcanic isles of Polynesia, where canoes cut across oceans guided only by stars. The kahuna taught that memory belonged not to the self alone, but to the bloodline. When a voyager stepped upon a new shore and felt it was known, though he had never landed there, it was the mana of his ancestors flowing through him. Their journeys, their discoveries, their visions were carried in his veins, awakening when the sea or land called to him. Déjà vu was the bond of ancestry, the proof that the living carried the footsteps of the dead within their own. Among the Inuit of the Arctic, who hunted upon endless ice and watched the sky blaze with living light, shamans believed that the soul traveled faster than the body. In dreams or trance, it wandered ahead, seeing the paths before the flesh arrived. When the hunter later stepped into that place and felt he had already stood there, it was because his spirit had gone before him, scouting in silence. Déjà vu was the overlap of 2 journeys, the swift flight of the soul and the slower tread of the body meeting upon the same snow. In the high mountains of the Himalayas, where monks sought silence upon peaks touching the heavens, the teaching was of samskara, the imprints carried by the soul across lifetimes. They said that every act, every thought, every vision left a mark upon the spirit, and when life returned, those marks returned also. Déjà vu was the rising of these imprints, like footprints seen again in the dust, long after the traveler had gone. In meditation, when a monk felt the strange return of places he had never seen, he smiled, for he knew the wheel of rebirth was turning still, carrying his soul through ages unbroken. Among the Persians of old, keepers of sacred fire, déjà vu was spoken of as a flame leaping across centuries. Each life was a torch, burning for a time, then extinguished. Yet the fire never died, for it sprang again in another hand, another age. When a man felt he had lived a moment before, it was the spark of that eternal flame igniting again, burning the same image into the soul. To them, the repetition was holy, the assurance that light and order would never be chinned. And in the rainforests of the Amazon, where shamans drank from the cup of visions and danced with spirits of plant and animal, déjà vu was seen as the dream world breaking into waking life. They believed that every soul traveled nightly into realms unseen, where it walked paths yet to come. When déjà vu struck, it was the dream remembered, the vision overlapping with the day. The forest itself held the memory, and man touching. It felt both realms at once, so the echo wandered through ice and desert, mountain and jungle, ocean and plain. It wore the faces of ancestors, of gods, of spirits, of stars, of earth itself. To some it was omen, to others blessing, to others curse. But to all it was undeniable, the sudden shiver of eternity pressing upon the heart, whispered that life was not a straight march into the unknown, but a circle, a wheel, a spiral, forever turning. And men, whether kings or shepherds, warriors or monks, stood trembling before it, knowing themselves to be not merely creatures of a single moment, but travelers through the endless memory of time. In the hidden kingdoms of Anatolia were Hittite kings carved treaties into stone and raised their temples to storm gods. Dasiavu was spoken of as the trace of divine order. The scribes told that the gods had etched every life upon celestial tablets, and when a soldier entered a foreign city and felt its streets already known, it was because his steps followed words written long before in the heavenly script. 4. The Hittites. The strange recognition was not a weakness of mind, but the reminder that all mortal roads had been decreed, and men merely played the roles inscribed by the eternal hand. Among the Phoenicians, who stitched the shores of the sea, with their swift ships, sailors told that Deja belonged to the memory of the waters themselves. When a mariner guided his vessel into a new harbor, yet felt its piers and houses already familiar, it was the sea whispering its remembrance into his heart. For the ocean had carried countless voyages, and every tide bore the memory of the journeys of ages. To feel the repetition of a coast or island was to be touched by the sea's own memory, for it was older than man and carried the weight of eternity in its waves. In the holy cities of Judea, where prophets cried out in the wilderness, Deja Vu was seen as the shimmering of divine will. The Eternal had written every act of man before his birth, and when one felt a moment already lived, it was the unfolding of prophecy. To them, Dasiavu was not illusion but revelation, the faint glow of destiny shining through the veil of the present. For what was known was always known by God and man in his sudden remembrance. Tasted only a drop of that endless foreled in Thrace and Phrygia. Beneath the rites of Dionysus and the wild drums of Cybele, men and women fell into frenzy and were carried beyond the boundaries of time. They told that in their ecstasies they remembered things they had never lived, as if the body itself spun through ages, uncounted. The torch, the wine, the dance, each struck them as familiar though never before touched. To them, Deja Vu was the gift of divine madness, the lifting of the spirit into the eternal circle where past and present, dream and waking were all one, in Scythia. Where horse lords thundered across the plains like storms, warriors said Deja Vu was the gallop of ancestors riding with them.
Ow.
When the wind struck their faces and they knew the moment though it was, it was the echo of forefathers thundering in their blood. To them, no rider charged alone. The spirits of lineage pressed their memory into the living. Dasiavu was the thunder of hooves across generations. Among the Gauls and Britons, where druids watched the moon through sacred oaks and carved spirals into stone, Dasiavu was taught as the soul's eternal journey. Time was no line, but a spiral winding endlessly back upon itself, and when one felt a place or moment repeated, it was the spirit meeting its own echo upon the curve. Stones, rivers, forests all bore memory, and when touched, they awakened recognition. To the Druids, Dasiavu was not chance, but proof of the spiral. The eternal path winding through every life, across the ocean, and the temples of the Maya. The priests, who measured time in wheels of fire, declared Dasiavu to be the soul's memory of former suns. They said that each age of the cosmos had risen and fallen, and men had lived beneath many skies. When a man climbed a pyramid and felt Dasiavu upon its steps, it was because his spirit had climbed them under a sun long extinguished, for nothing was lost. All returned upon the cycle of Bactans, and Dasiavu was the glimmer of those hidden repetitions in the empire of the Inca. Clinging to the shoulders of the Andes, Dasiavu was woven into Pasha, the fabric of time and space. Priests told that when a shepherd gazed across peaks and valleys and felt Dasiavu, it was because the weaving of the world had folded back, showing him the same thread twice. To them, Dasiavu was not merely memory, but the loom itself tightening. binding spirit into the eternal cloth of creation in the sacred dreaming of the Aboriginal peoples. Every stone and river was the work of ancestral song. When a man walked a path and felt it known, though his feet were new to it, the elders told him he was tracing the song lines of the ancestors. Dacia Vu was not his own memory, but the world remembering itself, the first voices of creation echoing through his steps and in the lodges of the plains, where the Lakota lifted their prayers to the Great Spirit. Dacia Vu was the turning of the sacred hoop. They taught that all life was circle, and when a man felt he had dreamed the waking moment, it was because he had touched the eternal now, where past and future meet. No moment was wasted, no life forgotten. All returned in the dance of the great circle. Thus the mystery walked through every land, clothed in many myths, yet always the same. Kings and shepherds, sailors and shamans, prophets and poets all trembled when it touched them. Some said it was destiny, others the whisper of gods, others the song of the soul itself. Yet none could escape the sudden shiver of eternity pressing upon the fragile present. For Dacia Vu was older than language, older than stone, older than the first fire, an echo of the eternal, haunting the heart of man. In the high deserts of Chaldea, where watchtowers rose to measure the heavens, the stargazers spoke of Deja. Vu is the trembling of fate itself, for they believed that the constellations inscribed all destinies. And when a man felt he had lived a moment before, it was because the stars had already sung that pattern into being. The sky was a scroll of fire, and the soul, bound to its song, was reminded by Dacia Vu that nothing was new beneath the firmament, only repeated in eternal design. In the sacred rites of Egypt, the priests of Thebes whispered that Dacia Vu was the soul recalling its trials before Osiris. Each spirit, when judged in the hall of Mat, carried the weight of countless lives, and when returned to flesh it bore scars of memory like hieroglyphs upon hidden stone. To feel a moment as already known was to glimpse those records, shadows of lifetimes stretching back into the silence before pyramids, before even the Nile itself. In Greece, the mysteries of Eleusis bound initiates in silence, and within their hidden chambers, it was said that some felt Dacia Vu as the veil lifted. They claimed it was the memory of the soul's descent and return, for in the rites they beheld visions older than the world. To them, the strange recognition was not accident, but awakening, the eternal remembrance of truths glimpsed beyond the grave. The philosophers, too, argued Plato, Pythagoras, Heraclitus, all circling the same riddle, that memory was older than birth, and Deja Vu the soul's reminder of eternity. Among the Persians of Zoroaster, Deja Vu was bound to the endless, the struggle of light and shadow. He said it was a spark of fire flashing twice in the long war of creation, proof that the battle was eternal. When a vision returned upon itself, the Magi taught it was Ahura Mazda's flame blazing again, a sign that existence circled, never ceased. In the hills of Judea, prophets told that Dacia Vu was the whisper of Yahweh, proof that man's path was already known. Every stone upon the road, every breath upon the wind, had been decreed before time's first dawn. When a man felt Dacia Vu, it was destiny showing itself, reminding him that his steps had been foreseen, written upon the eternal tablets before his birth. In the lands of the Druids, beneath mists and oaks, Deja Vu was the soul circling its spiral path. They carved the triskel upon stone, 3 spirals joined, symbol of eternal turning. When a bard sang and felt his song already sung, it was because his spirit had sung it in another age, under another moon. The Druids taught that Dacia Vu was not deception, but truth, the spirit folding back upon itself, touching its own past in endless spiral in the Isles of the North. The sagas told of Odin, who drank from Mimir's well to gain memory of all things. When men felt Dacia Vu, they said it was a drop from that well, slipping unbidden into mortal thought. For the tree Yggdrasil bore all time upon its branches, and the soul, when it brushed against those roots, remembered lives not its own ages already past, and ages yet to come. Among the Maya and Aztec, where pyramids rose toward suns that burned and died, Dacia Vu was seen as proof of the great cycles of the cosmos. They said the world itself had been born and destroyed many times, each age echoing the last. When a priest climbed the pyramid and felt Dacia Vu, it was the memory of another sun, another age, his soul remembering the endless destruction and rebirth of the cosmos. Time was not a river, but a wheel. And Dacia Vu was the shudder when one spoke of the wheel touched another. In the Andes, the Inca spoke of Pasha, the weaving of time and space, vast as the mountains themselves. To them, Dacia Vu was the pattern. Folding over, the thread touched twice upon the loom. A shepherd watching the sky felt Dacia Vu because his spirit had seen the same stars upon the same peaks in another age. All was weaving, all was cloth. And Dacia Vu was the soul catching sight of the pattern repeated among the peoples of Africa. Griots sang that Dacia Vu was the voice of the ancestors. They told that time was a circle danced by gods and men alike, and when the dancer felt the step already known, it was because his forebears had danced it too. No life was lived alone. Each was bound to the drumbeat of generations, echoing forever, and in the sacred lodges of the plains. Where the Lakota and their kin spoke of the Great Spirit, Dacia Vu was the touch of the sacred hoop. All things moved in circle, and Dacia Vu was proof that the circle returned. The dream and the waking moment were not apart but folded. And when a man opened his eyes and found the world already known, he was touching the eternal now, the center where all circles meet. So through every people, for every age, the mystery passed. Cloaked in myth, named in many tongues, yet always the same. The sudden remembrance of what should never be remembered. The echo of eternity pressing upon the fragile moment. Some called it fate, others rebirth, others the whisper of gods, or ancestors. Yet none could banish it, for it came like a ghost upon the heart, reminding humankind that he was not merely a creature of the present, but a wanderer in the endless circle of time in the lands of Mesopotamia, where the rivers flowed like veins. Of eternity, the oracles of Akkad spoke of visions repeating, not because the mind faltered, but because time itself folded like a garment. They told that Deja Vu was the seam of existence showing itself, the place where one age touched another. A farmer bending over his field might pause, struck with recognition. For in another turning of the world his hands had sown the same grain in the same soil. For them, the memory was not illusion but the truth of time's fabric, woven and rewoven by the hand of the gods. Among the Phoenicians, masters of the sea, sailors swore that Dacia Vu was the murmur of Melkart, lord of voyages. When a mariner beheld an unfamiliar coast and yet felt it known, it was said that the god had granted him memory of journeys past or those yet to come. For the Phoenicians knew the sea as eternal, bearing all men across its waves, and they believed that memory did not belong to the man alone, but to the ocean itself. Each shore was only another verse of the same song, and Dacia Vu was the refrain carried by the tide in the lands of Persia. The keepers of fire said that Dacia Vu was the flicker of the eternal flame leaping twice in the heart of man. 4. Creation was a battle unending, light against shadow, and each life was a torch lit from that divine fire. When a vision struck the soul as already known, it was because the spark had burned there before, casting the same light upon the same place across ages. Thus, repetition was not weakness, but proof that order held against chaos. The fire renewing itself without end. In Egypt, beneath temples vast as mountains, the priests of Karnak declared that Dacia Vu was the Katha life force calling. Its journeys, the Ba, the soul that flew with wings, returned again and again to the same places, and in each return a glimmer of recognition was carried over. When a mason paused and felt Dacia Vu as his chisel struck stone, it was not his hand alone but his eternal self, repeating the labor of centuries. The monuments rose not only for kings, but as mirrors of the eternal soul, and Dacia Vu was the shimmer of that mirror upon the present in Greece. The followers of Orpheus believed that souls drank from Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, before returning to life, yet sometimes they said the soul refused the draught or only sipped lightly and fragments of former lives remained. Déjà vu was such a fragment rising like a shard of memory from beneath the waters of oblivion. The mysteries taught that those who felt déjà vu were nearer to awakening, for they carried within them the song of eternity, half remembered, echoing faintly from the depths of time. Among the Romans, soldiers marching to distant lands felt déjà vu upon strange roads and in foreign cities. They swore they had walked those streets before, though no Roman standard had ever flown there. Augurs said it was the gods whispering that empire itself was cyclical, repeating its triumphs. In its ruins, the memory of one empire bled into another, and déjà vu was the proof that history, like men, was forever reborn. In the north, where sagas were sung by firelight, the Norse told that Odin sacrificed an eye to drink from Mimir's well, and in that draught gained memory of all ages. When men felt déjà vu, it was thought to be a drop from that well spilling into mortal thought. For Yggdrasil held all realms in its roots and branches, and when the soul brushed against those roots, memory of ages long past and ages yet to come welled up in it. Déjà vu was the proof that all moments already dwelt in the tree. Man only moved among their branches. In the shadowed isles of the Celts, Druids said that the spiral marked the nature of life, each turn a return. To walk into a grove and feel it known was to step into the spiral's curve, to meet oneself upon the same path. Stones, rivers, hills all bore memory, and the soul, when it touched them, awoke to that remembrance. Thus déjà vu was not trickery but truth, the eternal turning of the spiral. Across the seas and the temples of the Maya and the Aztec, the priests declared that déjà vu was the echo of former suns. For the world had been destroyed and remade many times, each age repeating in the shadow of the last. When a warrior felt déjà vu in battle, it was because he had fought that same struggle under another sun, another sky, another age of the cosmos. To them, the recognition was the memory of worlds themselves, spiraling through endless death and rebirth in the Andes. The Inca priests spoke of Pasha, time and space woven as one. When a shepherd felt déjà vu upon the mountainside, it was the thread of Pasha folding over, the loom of creation showing the same stitch twice. To them, déjà vu was the glimpse of the weaving itself, the assurance that no life was wasted but woven into the eternal cloth, in the dreaming of the aboriginal people. Every place was part of the song of the ancestors, and a man felt déjà vu upon a ridge. It was because he was following the song line, the path sung into being at the dawn of creation. His recognition was not his own, but the land's memory speaking through him, the echo of the first singers, and among the peoples of Africa, griots said that déjà vu was the voice of the ancestors in the blood. When a hunter entered a clearing, and knew it already, it was his forebears guiding him, their memory flowing in his veins. The world itself was a drum, beating endlessly, and déjà vu was the rhythm returning, calling each generation into the same eternal dance. Thus through deserts and mountains, rivers and oceans, temples and forests, the mystery passed. Kings and peasants, warriors and shamans, priests and wanderers all felt its touch. It wore many names: destiny, memory, fate, spirit, dream. But always it was the same. The sudden remembrance of what should never be remembered, the haunting echo of eternity pressing upon the fragile now in the lands of the Hellenes, where marble temples gleamed against the sea, and philosophers filled the air with questions. Some said déjà vu was the echo of immortal truths. Plato spoke of forms eternal, of perfect realities glimpsed before birth. To feel a moment as already lived was to brush against those hidden forms, the mind recalling what the soul had once known beyond the veil. Others, in the mysteries of Eleusis, whispered that déjà vu was the soul remembering its descent into flesh and its promise of return.
Allah lay down.
The vision of wheat and fire repeating not only in ritual but in life itself. Among the followers of Pythagoras, who heard the harmony of the cosmos in the plucked string of the lyre, Déjà vu was said to be the soul vibrating upon the same note twice. For the spheres themselves sang, and man was part of that eternal chord. When recognition struck unbidden, it was the song of the universe returning. The same melody heard once more through mortal ears in the mountains of Thrace, where the cults of Dionysus poured wine and danced by torchlight, men and women. In frenzy swore they had lived the revel before. Each movement of the dance, each cry of ecstasy, seemed both new and remembered, as though the god himself carried them through endless cycles of madness and rebirth. To them, déjà vu was proof that the spirit dissolved into eternity in the rapture of the right, and every vision was a return in the east. Across the flowing rivers of India, sages spoke of samsara, the endless wheel of rebirth. They told that déjà vu was the glimpse of that wheel, the recognition of a path once walked in another body, another age. When a child in a village turned to his mother and spoke of knowing places he had never seen, it was not wonder but certainty. His soul had lived there before. In the caves of yogis, meditating in silence, déjà vu was a smile upon their lips, for it confirmed that the soul carried countless imprints across countless lives, and that memory itself was proof of eternity in the high plateaus of Tibet. Monks spoke of karma as the thread binding each life to the next. Déjà vu was the knot where those threads touched, the soul brushing against its own deeds from ages past. A monk chanting upon a lonely peak might suddenly feel that his voice had echoed there long before, and he knew it was because his spirit had returned, tied to that place by the weaving of his own past actions. Farther still, in the kingdoms of China, the sages of the Tao told that life was a river, flowing yet circling. When a man stood upon a bridge and felt déjà vu, it was because his spirit had floated there in another turning of the stream, carried back to the same current. In the shrines of Shinto, the Japanese bowed to the kami, spirits dwelling in stone and tree, and they believed déjà vu was the ancestors' whispering memory through the living. A child playing beneath a sacred grove and declaring it known was seen as blessed. His forebears walking beside him, their memory flowing into his breath, across the deserts of Arabia, poets beneath starlit skies spoke of jinn, creatures of smoke and fire who moved between the worlds unseen. When a traveler halted his camel upon a dune and felt déjà vu, it was said the jinn had touched him, carrying echoes of other times into his heart. To them, memory was not man's alone, but the play of spirits, and déjà vu was the proof that mortals shared their steps with unseen wanderers. Among the Hebrews, prophets declared that déjà vu was not the soul wandering nor spirits whispering, but the design of God revealed. For the Eternal had written all before creation, and when a man felt déjà vu, it was the faint remembrance of his destiny, a fragment of the divine script glimmering through his flesh. Each repetition was revelation, a sign that man's life was not his own, but a story already inscribed upon the scroll of heaven in the north. Where sagas roared in smoky halls, the Norse said déjà vu was the memory of Yggdrasil itself, the world tree binding all realms. The Norns wove threads of fate, and déjà vu was the tug when two strands touched again. A warrior who paused in the midst of battle and felt the clash. Already lived was thought to have brushed against his own destiny, the tree whispering its secret to him in the chaos of war. Among the Celts, Druids gazed upon spirals carved in stone and taught that time returned endlessly. Déjà vu was the spiral opening beneath the feet, the soul meeting itself upon the curve. The land itself bore memory, and when men felt déjà vu, it was the voice of rivers and stones awakening in them, calling them back to paths walked in forgotten ages. And in the temples of the Maya, where scribes marked the turning of suns upon bark and stone, déjà vu was the memory of former worlds. They said that when a priest felt he had spoken a prayer before, it was because his spirit had prayed it under another sun, in a world now dust. Each moment repeated across cycles of fire and water, and déjà vu was the echo of cosmic rebirth in the soul. Thus across continents, across oceans, across mountains and plains, the echo walked with humankind, wore many names, bore many faces, yet was always the same, the sudden remembrance of what should never be remembered, the haunting return of what should never have been lived. Some called it fate, others the whisper of gods, others the song of ancestors, others the soul's own eternal journey. And though empires rose and crumbled, temples were built and buried, tongues were born and silenced, still the mystery endured, an ancient shadow pressing upon the present, reminding man that he was not bound to one life nor to one time, but to the eternal wheel of memory and return. In the caverns of Crete, the labyrinth was said to hold the Minotaur. Priests of the old cults believed déjà vu to be the shadow of the labyrinth itself, an endless maze in which the soul wandered, turning the same corners across many lives. When a man entered a hall and felt he had walked its passages before, it was because his spirit still roamed that eternal maze, circling again and again within the mystery of existence. Among the Etruscans of Italia, who read the sky in lightning and the entrails of beasts, déjà vu was interpreted as a divine omen. They taught that the gods revealed their will not only through storms and sacrifice, but also through the trembling of memory. When a nobleman paused at a banquet and felt the scene already known, it was not confusion but prophesied soul, glimpsing what had already been written in the tablets of fate. In Carthage, city of traders and storm gods, sailors spoke of déjà vu as the voice of Balhamon, the ancient fire. When they felt a harbor or coastline familiar, it was because the god had carried their spirit there in dreams, binding them to his eternal dominion. The fire did not merely burn once, but returned across ages, and déjà vu was the heat of its bids. Memory striking again in the heart, in the far north, among the Finns and Sami. The people of snow and reindeer, déjà vu was tied to the drum of the shaman. They said that each beat of the drum echoed through many worlds, and when the living felt déjà vu, it was because their spirit had heard that beat before in another realm. The sound carried across lifetimes, folding dream into waking past. Into present, in the deserts of Arabia, poets beneath star-filled skies told that déjà vu was born from Qadar, destiny itself. For all lives were written by Allah before the first dawn, and when a man felt déjà vu, it was the revelation of that eternal script. His recognition was not memory, but submission to fate, the reminder that every step was foreordained and every breath already measured. Across the lands of the Hebrews, déjà vu was spoken of by mystics of the Kabbalah as the stirring of the soul's roots. They said that each soul was part of a great tree, and when a man felt déjà vu, it was his spirit touching another branch of that tree, recalling what had been lived by his deeper self. To them, recognition was not illusion, but awakening. It's the soul remembering its place within the endless roots of creation, in the valleys of Mesopotamia, where oracles burned incense before Ishtar and Shamash. Déjà vu was said to be the glimpse of eternity through a crack in time. For life was believed to be written upon the tablets of destiny held by the gods, and déjà vu was when a mortal, by accident or by favor, caught sight of that eternal writing. The shiver of recognition was not his own, but the touch of the divine text upon his soul. And in the misted forests of Gaul and Britannia, the Druids raised circles of stone and taught that all existence was bound to the spiral of renewal. When warriors felt déjà vu as they raised their swords, it was because their spirits had fought that same battle beneath moons long past, and would fight it again beneath moons yet to come. The spiral turned, and all souls turned within it, brushing against their own echoes in the endless night. So the mystery spread, not bound to one people nor to one age, but universal as breath. It was found in the chants of priests, the songs of bards, the visions of shamans, the dreams of wanderers. It wore the face of gods, the voices of ancestors, the weight of fate. All yet, behind every mask it was the same, the sudden return of what should never return, the haunting echo of eternity pressing upon the fragile now in the kingdoms of Kush and Nubia, where the Nile bent southward and temples gleamed beneath the sun. The priests spoke of déjà vu as the journey of the Ka returning. They taught that the spirit wandered not only into death, but back into life again, carrying fragments of vision through the passage. When a warrior crossing the desert felt déjà vu upon the dunes, It was because his Ka had trod them in another age, and the desert itself whispered its memory back to him. To the people of Kush, Dasya Vu was the eternal echo of the soul, walking the same sands in unending procession. Among the Berbers of the Sahara, where caravans vanished into oceans of sand, elders said that Dasya Vu was the desert's own remembrance. They told that dunes shifted but never forgot, and when a man looked upon the horizon and felt it already known, it was the memory of the desert itself rising through him. The sand, older than kings, bore every journey within its grains, and in the moment of Dasya Vu, it lent its eternal knowledge to the mortal heart. In the stone-carved sanctuaries of Petra, the Nabateans worshipped their gods in temples cut from living rock, and they believed that Deja Vu was the breath of the mountain. For mountains lived longer than empires, and when a traveler felt Deja Vu upon a cliffside, it was because the rock remembered and the soul drank that memory unknowing. The land itself was alive, and its spirit seeped into the minds of men, giving them recognition of what they had never known. In the vast forests of Germania, where tribes gathered around sacred groves, the seers said that Deja Vu was the voice of word, the weaving of destiny. To them, the world was a great tapestry spun by unseen hands, and when a man felt Deja Vu, it was because his thread had crossed the same place upon the loom once more. They feared it and revered it, for it was a sign that no man walked free. But all moved upon the weaving already begun before their birth. Among the celts of the mist and stone, the spiral carved upon megaliths was their answer. But curved, always returning, and Dasya Vu was the soul brushing against its own former step upon that curve. A druid entering a sacred grove and feeling it already known was touching the spiral of eternity, where all lives turned back upon themselves in endless circles, in the empires of the Hittites and Lydians. Kings who consulted oracles were told that Deja Vu was divine confirmation. A vision repeated in the mind meant the gods had spoken it twice, and thus it was certain. To them, Dasya Vu was an omen of power, a sign that the moment carried weight in the eyes of heaven, destined to shape the fate of nations. In the steppes of Central Asia, where nomads rode beneath endless skies, shamans said that Deja Vu was the echo of Tengri, the eternal blue heaven. When a rider felt Deja Vu beneath the same expanse of sky, it was because the spirit of heaven had bent low, pressing its eternal vision into his eyes. The sky was unchanging, and the repetition of memory was its voice, reminding man of the vastness to which he belonged in the frozen wilds of the far north, where the Sami beat their drums in trance. Dasya Vu was called the crossing of worlds. Each drumbeat was said to echo across realms, and when the living felt Dasya Vu, it was because their spirit had stepped into another world and returned. The recognition was the trace of that crossing, a memory of a life lived in a parallel realm, and in the islands of the Pacific, where ancestors guided voyagers by stars and waves, Dasya Vu was the song of lineage. A man landing upon a shore and feeling it known was not recalling his own life, but the journey of forebears flowing in his blood. To them, Dasya Vu was the voice of ancestry, the proof that the dead sailed with the living, their memory alive in every heartbeat, thus through deserts and forests, oceans and mountains, across tribes and empires. The echo followed mankind. It wore the faces of fate, of gods, of land, of ancestors, but it was always the same. The sudden, haunting recognition of the eternal. Men trembled before it, prayed to it, sang of it, feared it, yet never could they cast it away. For Dasya Vu was not born of one people, nor of one age, but was the voice of eternity itself, whispering through every soul that walked the earth in the lands of Urartu, where fortresses crowned the mountains and the air smelled of cedar and bronze. The priests said Dasya Vu was the soul catching the echo of its own shadow. They told that when a man entered a fortress for the first time and felt its walls already known, it was because his spirit had walked there in a dream sent by the gods. Dreams were not phantoms, but pathways, and Dasya Vu was proof that the dream and the waking world touched in secret places. In Armenia, where fire altars burned beneath the snowy peaks of Ararat, Sages taught that déjà vu was the flame remembering itself. A single spark leaped from fire to fire, from age to age, never dying, but only transforming. When a pilgrim felt déjà vu at the sight of a shrine, it was because that spark had already flared there in another life, another time. Thus, memory was not of man alone, but of the divine fire that bound all ages together, in the green valleys. Of the Caucasus, where tribes sang epics older than kingdoms, they told that déjà vu was the voice of the Narts, heroes whose deeds echoed through the land. When a warrior felt déjà vu upon a mountain path, it was because the spirits of the Narts had walked it before, leaving their memory upon the stone. To them the land bore the songs of its heroes, and man, treading it, inherited those songs. Underneath. In Ethiopia, where kings claimed descent from Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, priests declared that déjà vu was the mark of divine covenant. A man who felt a moment twice had been chosen to glimpse the eternal wisdom of God, whose hand wrote not once but forever. Déjà vu was seen as blessing, a reminder that the mortal path was not chaos, but guided by sacred order in the deserts of Nubia, where sandstone temples stood against the burning sun. Déjà vu was said to be the whisper of the Nile itself. For the river returned again and again in its floods, and what it carried was eternal renewal. When a fisherman felt déjà vu at the water's edge, it was because the river remembered him, and its eternal flowing stirred recognition within his soul. In the hidden heart of Africa, among the Dogon of Mali, sages who traced the stars declared that déjà vu was a sign of the serious mystery, the star of origins calling back to mankind. They said that the soul came from the stars, and when déjà vu struck, it was the star seed within, recalling its ancient home. To them, the repetition was not earthly at all, but celestial. A reminder that man was woven of the heavens and the lands of the Yoruba. Where drums and divination carried the voice of Oromila, déjà vu was said to be the memory of the Orishas. Touching mortal thought, for every soul was guided by its guardian spirit, and when déjà vu came, it was that spirit revealing a glimpse of destiny already seen in heaven. The recognition was not man's alone, but a divine echo. A ripple from the world above, pressing into the world below, in the rainforests where pygmy hunters moved beneath the green canopy. It told that the forest itself remembered older than any tribe. When a hunter felt déjà vu upon the trail, it was because the trees whispered their ancient memory into his mind. To them, every creature, every river, every root bore knowledge. And déjà vu was man drinking from the memory of the living forest. Across the oceans, among the Maori of Aotearoa, déjà vu was called the karanga of the ancestors, the calling of those who had gone before. When a voyager in his canoe beheld a distant shore and felt déjà vu, it was because his ancestors stood upon that beach in spirit, calling him home. Time was not severed but braided, and déjà vu was the tug of the ancestral thread pulling, the living toward the eternal family of souls, and so the tale grew ever broader, spreading like dawn across the face of the earth. From mountain to desert, forest to ocean, all peoples felt the same strange return. They gave it names of fate, and gods of ancestors and stars, of fire and dream. But behind every mask it was the same, the sudden recognition of eternity. For déjà vu was no mere trick of the mind, but the eternal song itself, echoing through the fragile vessel of man, reminding him that all paths are one path, all lives are one life, all time is one circle without end. In the mountains of Lydia, where kings minted the first coins and shrines gleamed with offerings, soothsayers told that déjà vu was the echo of fate's bargain. They said that every man had already paid his price in the market of destiny, and when he felt a moment twice, it was because the gods were collecting their due. The marketplace of heaven was older than empires, and déjà vu was its shadow falling. Upon the earth in Phrygia, land of Cybele and Attis, worshippers in wild procession believed déjà vu was the turning of the sacred wheel of life and death. When the cymbals clashed and the worshippers felt their visions repeat, they cried that it was the goddess revealing her eternal cycle. Every cut of the blade, every drop of blood, every chant beneath the pines was not the first, but the thousandth. and Dacia Vu was the spirit awakening to the circle. Among the Canaanites, who raised their voices to Baal and Asherah, Dacia Vu was feared as the shadow of prophecy. They said that when the moment doubled in memory, it was because the gods had spoken it already in their hidden councils. The repetition was not man's, but divine, and to feel Dacia Vu was to step into the script of heaven, written long before the world was made. In the lands of the Scythians, who rode like fire across the steppes, Dacia Vu was the thunder of hoofbeats echoing through generations. They told that each rider was never alone, for his ancestors galloped beside him unseen. When a warrior felt Dacia Vu upon the plain, it was because the hooves of the dead were beating with his own, carrying their memory into his blood in the kingdoms of the Etruscans, who gazed into the flight of birds and the crack of lightning. Dacia Vu was taken as the strongest of omens. For if the gods repeated a sign in heaven, then surely they repeated signs in the soul. A man who felt Dacia Vu was said to be touched by prophecy, his life bound to events already decreed. Thus, repetition was never chance but the mark of destiny. Among the Thracians, who sang of Orpheus and his descent into shadow, Dacia Vu was the faint music of the lyre heard again. They said that when a man felt Dacia Vu, it was the song of Orpheus himself threading through the soul, the eternal melody of death and return. Each recognition was a note in that endless song, played once in ages past and again in the heart of the living, in the wide lands of the Slavs, where rivers ran like silver through dark forests. Dacia Vu was spoken. Of his rod, the weaving of kin and fate. They said that the soul carried not only its own memory, but the memory of all its blood. When a child felt Dacia Vu, it was not his own past, but that of his ancestors, flowing into him like water through roots. To them, Dacia Vu was the inheritance of the dead, the past made living in the present, in the shadowed forests of Germania, where sacred groves whispered with hidden power. Dacia Vu was word, the weaving of the Norns. They told that the threads of fate bent back upon themselves. And when a man felt Dacia Vu, it was because his thread had crossed the same place upon the loom once more. The recognition was not his, but the loom's, the eternal weaving speaking through him. Among the tribes of the Baltic, where the sun was worshipped as Sol, Dacia Vu was believed to be the flicker of the sun's eternal journey. For the sun rose each morning and returned each night, repeating endlessly, and so too did the soul. When a fisherman on the shore felt Dacia Vu, it was Sol reminding him that nothing was new beneath her gaze, that all was return in the isles of the Aegean. Where the cult of Apollo sang beneath bright pillars, Dacia Vu was said to be the god's light shining twice upon the same soul. They believed the repetition was vision, not memory, for Apollo revealed truth in riddles, and Dacia Vu was one such riddle, brief and shining, vanishing as swiftly as dawn, so the mystery wound itself tighter and tighter around mankind, like a serpent coiling without end. In every land, under every sky, in the temples of gods and the tents of nomads, among the chants of priests and the silence of wanderers, it spoke with one voice, the return without beginning, the memory without source. Men gave it names, clothed it in myth, built rituals around it, feared it, and worshipped it. Yet behind all names, behind all stories, it remained unchanged, the haunting breath of eternity brushing against the moment, reminding all who felt it that time was not a river, but a circle, and that the soul was forever bound within its endless turning, in the lands of the Hellenes, where the Aegean shimmered and the voices of poets rose like incense to the heavens. Dacia Vu was placed. Among the mysteries of fate, Heraclitus spoke that all things returned, that the river was never the same, yet forever repeated. The sudden memory of what should not be known was, to his followers, the river of time bending back upon itself, carrying man into waters he had already crossed. In the secret rites of Eleusis, where wheat and torch were lifted in silence, initiates felt visions repeated, as though they had lived the cycle of life, death, and rebirth countless times. Dacia Vu was there regarded not as confusion but as revelation. the unveiling of the eternal circle hidden beneath mortal days in the halls of Pythagoras, where numbers sang and the music of the spheres was heard in thought. Déjà vu was the harmony repeating its note. The cosmos itself was a lyre, and man a string within it. When déjà vu struck, it was the eternal chord vibrating twice, sounding the same melody across ages, proving that the soul was bound to rhythms older than the stars. In the Roman world, where empires spread across continents, déjà vu was divided between augury and philosophy. Augurs, reading the flight of birds, claimed it was prophecy, a vision of what was to come mistaken for memory. Stoics, gazing into the order of nature, said it was the mark of the Logos, the divine reason that bound all things. For if the cosmos itself returned eternally, then man too would feel the echo of his own footsteps upon its path. In the ancient lands of Persia, where the flame of Zoroaster burned unceasing, déjà vu was seen as the spark of fire leaping twice. In the soul, the Magi taught that time itself was a cycle, bound within the eternal war of light and darkness. To feel a moment repeated was to glimpse that cycle, the same flame kindled again in mortal memory, proof that the cosmic battle circled forever. Never-ending in Judea, where prophets walked in desert silence, déjà vu was seen as the shimmer of destiny, where they declared that every word, every act, every breath was already written in the book of life. When a man felt he had lived a moment before, it was because he had stepped into a line long ago decreed. The recognition was not his, but God's, the shadow of divine will pressing upon the present. Among the Celts, who traced spirals upon stone and raised circles to the heavens, déjà vu was the soul, brushing against its own reflection, they said. The spirit traveled endlessly through life and death, curving back upon itself like the spiral. When a druid entered a grove and felt it already known, he had touched the echo of his own soul, turning along the eternal path in the icy realms of the north. The Norse said that déjà vu was the whisper of Yggdrasil, the world tree, beneath. Its roots lay Mimir as well, source of all memory. And when a man felt a moment twice, it was because a drop from that well had touched him. The Norns, who wove the fates, spun patterns that crossed and repeated, and déjà vu was the shiver of their thread, brushing the mortal soul with destiny. Across the oceans, the temples of the Maya, déjà vu was the voice of the former suns. They believed the world had been created and destroyed many times, and each age echoed the last. When a priest felt déjà vu upon the steps of a pyramid, it was because his soul had climbed them before, in another world, under another sun. The repetition was cosmic, the echo of creation itself returning through the cycles of ages. Among the Inca, high in the Andes, déjà vu was the weaving of Pasha time and space united. To feel a moment repeated was to glimpse the loom of the world, the same thread touched twice by the shuttle of eternity. Mountains, rivers, and stars were not separate from man but woven with him. And déjà vu was the proof that all threads crossed and recrossed within the same eternal cloth. In the dreaming of the aboriginal peoples, déjà vu was the song of the ancestors heard again. For every path was a songline, sung into being at the dawn of creation. When a man felt déjà vu upon a ridge or in a grove, it was because the song of the ancestors had sounded there, and his spirit remembered it, not from his own life, but from the voice of the dreaming itself. And among the peoples of Africa, where griots kept the memory of tribes, déjà vu was the voice of the ancestors calling through the blood. They said that when a man felt a moment repeated, it was his lineage speaking, reminding him of the unbroken chain of life. No one lived alone. Every soul carried the memory of those before, and déjà vu was the echo of their lives rising within. So the tale flowed on, unbroken, weaving through temples and forests, deserts and seas. It spoke in the tongues of priests, poets, shamans, and kings. Yet always it was the same, the return without beginning, the memory without source. For déjà vu was the shadow of eternity, pressing upon the fragile moment, reminding all who felt at that time was not a straight path but a circle, and the soul was forever caught within its endless turning in the valleys of the Indus. Where forgotten cities of brick once stood with streets laid straight as the constellations, the sages taught that the soul was never bound to one vessel of clay. They said that when a man bent to draw water and felt déjà vu, it was because his spirit had lifted the same jar in another age, another life, and the wheel of rebirth had turned him back upon the same gesture. To them, déjà vu was not a fleeting shiver, but the call of the eternal wheel, proof that the breath within man had traveled far before. In the ancient courts of China, beneath the gaze of the Yellow Emperor's heirs, philosophers of the Tao spoke of the endless way. They taught that life was a current flowing in circles, always returning to its own source. When a scholar stood beneath a bridge and felt déjà vu, it was because his spirit had followed that current before, drifting upon the same stream of eternity. Confucian masters said it was the memory of ancestors dwelling in the blood, for no man belonged only to himself, but carried within him the remembrance of all who came before. In the islands of Japan, where kami dwelled in stone and tree, déjà vu was said to be the whisper of the ancestors. When a child ran through a grove and declared he had known it always, the elders said the kami were guiding him, pressing the memory of lineage into his heart. To them, déjà vu was a blessing, a sign that the living and the dead walked together in harmony, sharing the same breath in the great steppes where nomads lifted their eyes to the boundless sky. Déjà vu was the touch of Tengri, the eternal. Blue, they said that heaven bent low when a man felt repetition, reminding him that all steps had been measured beneath the eternal dome. To them, déjà vu was not confusion, but confirmation. The life of man was a reflection of the cycles of sky and season, forever circling back upon themselves. In the frozen lands where shamans beat their drums to call spirits, déjà vu was explained as the soul moving faster than the flesh. They said the spirit wandered ahead in dreams, scouting the road, and when the body arrived it felt recognition because the soul had already stood there. Thus déjà vu was the meeting of two journeys, the swift flight of spirit and the slow tread of body, folding together upon the same path in the jungles of the Amazon. Where shamans drank the vine of visions, déjà vu was the dream, bleeding into daylight. They said that in the night, the soul traveled along hidden roads, and when those roads appeared again beneath the sun, man felt recognition. To them, déjà vu was not a weakness of memory, but the proof that waking and dreaming were two halves of the same world, touching one another in secret. Among the tribes of the plains of the Americas, where drums echoed the heartbeat of the earth, déjà vu was the sign of the great hoop. All things moved in circle, and when a man felt déjà vu, it was because he had stepped again upon that circle. The buffalo, the grass, the wind all returned in endless turning, and so did the soul. Recognition was not trickery, but truth. The soul walking again where it had always walked, in the icy reaches of the north, Norse said. Déjà vu was the whisper of Yggdrasil itself. For the tree held all realms, and every thread of fate was woven into its roots. When a man felt a moment repeated, it was because the Norns had spun it twice upon their loom, and he had stumbled upon the knot where the threads crossed. To the skald's déjà vu was the proof that time itself was a tapestry, and man but a figure stitched upon it, forever repeating. In the misty lands of the Celts, druids carved spirals upon stone to teach the same mystery. They said déjà vu was the soul, circling upon its spiral path, meeting its own footsteps once more. Stones, rivers, and forests remembered, and when the spirit touched them, it awakened that memory. Thus déjà vu was not the trick of a failing mind, but the truth of the spiral's eternal return. And in the mountains of the Maya, where calendars turned like wheels of fire, déjà vu was the echo of former suns. They said the cosmos had been born and destroyed many times, each age repeating the last. When a priest felt déjà vu upon the pyramid steps, it was the memory of an older world, his soul repeating the same gesture beneath another sun. To them, déjà vu was cosmic memory, the echo of worlds themselves returning. Thus, from river to mountain, from desert to sea, from forest to ice, the riddle was everywhere the same. Men named it fate, gods, spirits, ancestors, or dreams, but always, it was the sudden remembrance of what should never be remembered, the shadow of eternity cast upon the present. And still it lingers, carried like wind through the ages, whispering to the soul that time is not a line but a circle. And all who walk it are bound to walk it again, in the red lands of Canaan, where altars smoked with offerings to Baal and Asherah. The seers declared that déjà vu was the echo of prophecy. They told that every act was spoken twice, once in the secret councils of the gods, and once in the life of men. When a shepherd felt déjà vu upon the hillside, it was because the moment had already been uttered in heaven, and his soul was only now catching its reflection. The repetition was no error, but the unveiling of destiny in the mighty halls of Babylon, where lions were carved in glazed blue brick. Priests who read the movements of the heavens proclaimed that déjà vu was the sign of eternal recurrence. They charted the stars and saw their cycles repeat without fail. So too, they said, must the soul return. When a scribe lifted his stylus and felt he had written the word before, it was the memory of another age, for he had inscribed it already. Under a sky that had turned the same pattern ages past, in the temples of Phoenicia, where merchants prayed to Melkart before they set sail, sailors believed déjà vu to be the memory of the sea itself. The ocean carried all journeys, and when a mariner entered a harbor for the first time, yet felt it known, it was because the waves had whispered their ancient remembrance into his blood. The sea was older than cities, and its memory older than nations, and in déjà vu, it spoke through the sailor's heart in Arabia. Beneath the vast night sky strewn with endless stars, poets sang that déjà vu was the voice of the unseen jinn. It was shared with beings of fire and wind. When a traveler paused in the desert and felt déjà vu, it was because the jinn had whispered fragments of forgotten ages into his ear, mingling their timeless vision with his fleeting life. Among the Hebrews, prophets declared that déjà vu was the shimmer of God's eternal plan. For the Eternal had written all before time began. And when a man felt déjà vu, it was because his life was unfolding upon lines already inscribed in the book of life. His recognition was not his own, but the brief glimpse of divine foreknowledge, pressing upon his soul in the mountains of Armenia, where Ararat rose, snow-crowned into the clouds. Sages said, déjà vu was the spark of fire remembering itself. Flame never truly died. It leaped from age to age, kindled again and again. When a pilgrim felt déjà vu at the sight of a shrine, it was because the eternal fire within him had already burned there in another life, another time, in the Caucasus. Where songs of the Norse told of heroes who shaped the land, déjà vu was the voice of those heroes echoing in the present. A warrior who walked a path and felt it known was treading where the Norse had gone, their memory impressed upon the Norse stone itself. To them, déjà vu was the inheritance of heroism, the land singing back the deeds of its ancient champions through the living. Among the Ethiopians, who traced their blood to Solomon and Sheba, déjà vu was seen as the mark of covenant. When a man felt he had lived a moment before, it was the proof that his life was guided by divine order, written not once, but forever. Kings and priests alike believed such repetition to be blessing, the soul's assurance that it walked a road, prepared by God's own hand. In Nubia, where temples carved of sandstone glowed red beneath the sun, déjà vu was called the whisper of the Nile. For the river returned in its flood each year, carrying renewal without end. When a fisherman felt déjà vu at its shore, it was because the river itself remembered him, calling back the shadow of ages when he had stood there before, among the Dogon of Mali, who watched the stars of Sirius with ancient eyes. Déjà vu was the memory of the heavens. They said man's soul had come from the stars, and when déjà vu struck, it was the star seed within, recalling its cosmic home. To them, déjà vu was not earthly at all, but celestial, a shimmer of light from beyond this world pressing into the mortal mind in the lands of the Yoruba, where the Orishas guided every breath. Déjà vu was said to be the voice of destiny revealed. For before birth, every soul chose its path in heaven, And when Deja vu came, it was the soul remembering that choice. The moment repeated because it had been seen already in the other world, accepted, embraced, and bound to fate. So from Africa to Asia, from deserts to oceans, from mountains to stars, the mystery spread its wings. It wore the faces of prophecy, of gods, of ancestors, of fire, of water, of sky. It came suddenly, like a wind without source, like a shadow without body, reminding mankind that no life was solitary and no moment was new. For Deja vu was the echo of eternity itself, the voice of unbroken time speaking through the fragile vessel of the present, in the highlands of the Hittites, where storm gods thundered above stone fortresses. The priests said Deja vu was the stamp of divine law upon the soul. They told that the gods wrote every life upon tablets of heaven, and when a man felt a moment twice, it was because his soul brushed against the line inscribed for him long ago. To them, recognition was no folly, but revelation, the gods reminding man that his road had been decreed before his first breath. In Lydia, land of golden rivers and mighty kings, Deja vu was believed to be the shimmer of fortune returning. For they held that Tyche, goddess of chance, circled endlessly, granting and reclaiming her gifts. When a merchant felt Deja vu in the marketplace, it was because the wheel of fortune had brought him to the same place once more, repeating its patterns through the ages. Among the Thracians, worshippers of Dionysus who danced in torchlight, Deja vu was the trembling of the eternal right. They said the god of ecstasy led souls beyond time, dissolving the barrier between lives. When a devotee cried out that he had felt the moment before, it was not madness, but truth. The spirit had danced the same steps in ages long past, and would dance them again when the circle closed. In Carthage, proud city of traders and fire altars, sailors believed Deja vu was the voice of Tanit whispering across the waves. When they set foot on distant shores and felt the sand known beneath their feet, it was the goddess guiding them. For she had carried their spirits there in dream before their ships arrived. To them, Deja vu was the divine chart of the sea, a hidden map written not upon parchment, but upon the soul. In the forests of Germania, where tribes gathered in groves to honor their gods, Deja vu was woven into the concept of word, the weaving of fate. They believed that the Norns who spun the threads of all lives sometimes wove the same pattern twice, and the soul, passing through it, felt recognition. Deja vu was thus the mark of destiny, the tug of the thread reminding mortals that all was already woven. In the dark woods of the Slavs, where rivers glimmered beneath moonlight, the old wise women spoke of Rod, the great ancestor who bound families and fates. They said Deja vu was not the memory of the living, but of the lineage, the soul carrying echoes of the forebears. When a youth felt Deja vu, it was the blood itself remembering the past of his ancestors returning through him. Among the Balts, who raised hymns to Sol, the sun, Deja vu, was called the reflection of her eternal journey. The sun rose each morning, and so too did the soul repeat its steps. When a farmer looked across his field and felt it already known, it was Sol herself reminding him that nothing under her light was new, for her cycle bound all men in the islands of the Aegean. Worshippers of Apollo said Deja vu was the glimmer of prophecy mistaken for memory. For Apollo revealed truth in riddles, and sometimes his vision came disguised as remembrance. When a poet felt Deja vu, it was the god's light piercing twice, once as vision and once as moment, in the far steppes where Scythians thundered upon their steeds. Deja vu was believed to be the thunder of ancestors galloping alongside the living. A rider who felt Deja vu in battle was not alone, for the shades of the forefathers beat their hooves with him, carrying their memories into his blood. To them, the repetition was the sound of lineage, echoing without end. In the far north of the Finns in Sami, where the drums summoned spirits and the sky burned with northern light, Deja vu was said to be the crossing of worlds. The shamans told that each man walked in many realms, and sometimes the same vision appeared in both. Deja vu was the overlapping of those realms, the shadow of one world falling upon another. Thus the mystery pressed deeper into every corner of earth, into cities of stone, into forests of oak, across seas of storm, over mountains crowned with snow. Everywhere it bore the same breath, the strange return, the memory without source, the echo without beginning. Men clothed it in many tongues, fate, prophecy, spirit, ancestry, dream, but beneath every name it was the same. Déjà vu was the whisper of eternity, the reminder that time itself is not straight, but a circle, and that all who walk it must walk it again, in the plains of Mesopotamia, where kings carved their victories in stone and temples rose tear upon. Tear into the sky, the wise proclaimed that déjà vu was the crack in the wall of time. They taught that the soul, forever wandering, sometimes glimpsed through that crack and beheld what had already been lived. A priest walking into the courtyard of Ishtar might pause, certain he had seen its columns before, though never had his feet touched them. Yet his spirit had walked that space in ages hidden, and the gods allowed him for a breath to remember. In the deep sanctuaries of Egypt, where the Book of the Dead guided souls through the underworld, scribes said, déjà vu was the Ka awakening to its own immortality. The Ba, flying free on wings, carried memories from age to age, and sometimes those memories flared in the present like stars breaking the night. A mason who carved the same hieroglyph felt déjà vu because his spirit had traced it in another, hand upon another wall, centuries before. To them, déjà vu was a spark from the eternal body of the soul. Slipping through the veil of forgetting, in the marble courts of Greece, philosophers sat in shaded colonnades and argued that déjà vu was anamnesis, the recollection of eternal truths. Plato declared that the soul, before birth, beheld perfect forms, and when a man felt déjà vu, it was because he touched once more those visions. To walk into a hall and feel it already known was not error, but memory of the soul's true dwelling. And in the caves of Eleusis, initiates whispered that déjà vu was the sacred memory of Persephone's descent and return, a sign that their souls too would walk the cycle of death and rebirth. The Romans, heirs of Greece, looked upon déjà vu with both awe and caution. Their augurs said it was a prophecy come too soon, the gods revealing the same moment twice to prove its weight. Philosophers of the Stoic school declared it was the Logos' divine reason, repeating its pattern through the cosmos. When Caesar himself, standing upon the battlefield, felt déjà vu, it was said to be the echo of empire itself, repeating upon the wheel of history. Among the Persians, guardians of fire, déjà vu was the flame of Ahura Mazda leaping again across the ages. They taught that the world was an eternal struggle between light and shadow, and déjà vu was the flame flashing twice to remind men of their place in that endless war. For if light was eternal, then every spark was bound to burn more than once. Among the Hebrews, prophets spoke that déjà vu was the brief shining of destiny through the veil of days. Every act had been written in the scroll of heaven, and when a man felt déjà vu, he had stumbled upon his own line in that divine book. His recognition was the echo of what God already knew, a moment decreed before time itself began, in the forests of the Celts. Druids pointed to the spiral carved in stone, saying it was the mark of eternal return. Déjà vu was the soul treading the same curve, circling back upon its path. Stones, rivers, trees, each held memory, and when man touched them, he felt déjà vu as their remembrance poured into his heart. In the icy northlands of the Norse, the Skalds sang of Yggdrasil, whose roots bound all realms and whose branches bore all fates. Beneath its roots lay Mimorous well, filled with memory of all things. When a warrior in battle felt déjà vu, it was a drop from that well upon his tongue, tasting the knowledge of ages. To them, déjà vu was the whisper of the Norns, spinning and respinning the threads of fate upon their loom. In the sacred lands of the Maya, priests who read the turning of the calendar stones declared that déjà vu was the memory of other suns. They said the cosmos had been born and destroyed 5 times, and each age echoed the last. When a man felt déjà vu, it was his soul remembering the same act performed in another world, under another sun, among the Inca who raised their empire. Upon the peaks of the Andes, déjà vu was the weaving of pasha, the cloth of space and time. They taught that the loom sometimes folded a thread upon itself, and in that fold a man felt the repetition of a moment. A shepherd gazing at the stars and struck by déjà vu was not mistaken. He had seen those stars before. The cloth of the world had already laid them in that pattern, in another turning of the weave, and in the dreaming of the aboriginal peoples. Where every path was a songline sung by ancestral spirits, déjà vu was the call of those first voices. When a wanderer paused in the outback and said he had known that place before, it was the song of the ancestors echoing within him, for the land itself carried their memory. To them, déjà vu was not his alone, but the earth's remembrance, shared with him in sacred trust. So the riddle bound itself into every people, every land, every tongue. Some named it the gods, others the ancestors, others the fire, others the stars. Yet all knew the same truth, that time was not a straight road but a circle, that memory was not bound to one life, and that the soul was forever touched by eternity. Déjà vu was the echo of the eternal, a shadow cast across the fragile now by the infinite past and future, in the shadowed coasts of Phoenicia, where purple sails cut across the wind-dark sea. The mariners said déjà vu was the ocean's own whisper. For the sea was older than men, older than cities, older even than the stars in the eyes of the sailors who prayed to Melkart. When a helmsman guided his ship into a harbor he had never seen, yet felt it as familiar as his own hearth, he knew the waters themselves were breathing their memory through him. The waves, they said, carried the footsteps of every voyage ever taken. And in déjà vu, the ocean lent those memories to mortal flesh. In Carthage, queen of the western sea, priests of Tanit and Baal-Hamon declared that déjà vu was the fire's reminder. For the flame never dies, it leaps from torch to torch, altar to altar, age to age. When a citizen paused in the marketplace and felt the stalls and stones already known, it was because his soul bore the ember of an older life, one kindled in another time. The fire repeated itself in him, as it had repeated itself in empires and in gods, eternal and unyielding. In Anatolia, among the Hittites and Lydians, kings who ruled with iron and storm gods believed déjà vu was the thunder of fate striking. Twice their scribes said the tablets of heaven bore every life, inscribed before man drew his first breath. To feel déjà vu was to touch that inscription, the echo of divine commandment searing itself upon the present moment in the sacred. Lands of Judea, prophets spoke of déjà vu with trembling voices. They said it was the shadow of the Eternal's plan an instant, when man caught a glimpse of his path already written. The recognition was not illusion but revelation, destiny unveiling itself for the briefest of moments, reminding the living that their lives were the echoes of divine decree. In the highlands of Armenia, where snow crowned the peak of Ararat, sages said déjà vu was the song of fire, for flame carried memory across centuries. A pilgrim who felt déjà vu at the sight of a shrine was not mistaken. His spirit was remembering the spark of devotion that had burned there in other lives, in other ages, in the lands of the Caucasus, where the Norse heroes of legend were said to shape mountains with their deeds. The tribes believed déjà vu was the voice of those heroes. When a hunter walked a path and felt it already known, he was treading where the Norse themselves had walked, their memory carved into the stones. The land carried their song, and man, stepping upon it, inherited that remembrance without knowing. Among the Ethiopians, who traced their lineage to Solomon and Sheba, déjà vu was revered as covenant. For when a king or priest felt the repetition of a moment, it was proof that his path was bound to divine order, sealed not once but forever. Déjà vu was blessing, the glimmer of God's eternal design shining through the veil of days. In Nubia, where sandstone temples rose against the desert sky, déjà vu was said to be the murmur of the Nile. The river returned in its floods, each year bringing renewal without end. So too did the soul return to its moments, repeating them as the river repeated its flow. When a fisherman felt déjà vu at the water's edge, it was because the Nile remembered him. Carrying his reflection upon its eternal current among the Dogon of Mali, who knew the hidden paths of the stars, déjà vu was the voice of Sirius, the star of beginnings. He said the soul was born of the heavens, and when déjà vu came, it was the starseed within, remembering its celestial home. Recognition was not earthly, but stellar, a fragment of the cosmos breaking through into mortal thought. In the forests of the Yoruba, where the Orishas guided every act, déjà vu was the soul recalling the pact that had made before birth. They said that each man chose his path in heaven, and when déjà vu came, it was the remembrance of that choice, stirring for an instant within the living. It was not error but destiny, the echo of the soul's own vow to the Orishas. And in the endless plains where Scythians thundered on their steeds, déjà vu was the gallop of ancestors riding with the living. A warrior in battle who felt déjà vu was not merely fighting in his own age, but repeating the charge of those who came before. Their hoofbeats echoed in his blood, and the moment returned because it had been lived 1,000 times by his lineage. Thus, through empires and tribes, temples and deserts, seas and stars, the mystery bore the same face, a memory without source, a return without beginning. Some called it prophecy, others fire, others the whisper of ancestors, others the hand of gods. Yet always it was the same shadow pressing upon the present déjà vu, the echo of eternity reminding mankind that all is circle, and that no step is ever wholly new beneath the gaze of heaven. In the kingdoms of Assyria, where winged bulls guarded, palace gates and kings carved their power into stone reliefs. The prophets of Ashur said déjà vu was the trembling of fate's hammer. They taught that when a soldier marched into battle and felt the clash already known, it was because the gods had struck that moment twice upon the anvil of destiny. The repetition was not illusion but decree, a sign that time itself bent to the will of heaven in the courts of Babylon. Where ziggurats reached to ward, the heavens and stars were studied as divine script. Scribes declared that déjà vu was born of the celestial wheel. As the planets traced their endless orbits, so too did the lives of men. A scholar who felt déjà vu at his clay tablets was remembering not his own hand, but the cycle of the cosmos repeating. To them, the sky was the great book, and déjà vu was its page turning back upon itself. In the valleys of the Medes and Persians, where fire altars blazed eternal, priests proclaimed that déjà vu was the spark of holy flame, remembering its own journey. Each soul, they said, was a torch lit from the sacred fire, and when a man felt déjà vu, it was because his flame had burned in that place before, casting the same light upon the same shadows across ages uncounted, in the lands of Israel, where prophets raised their voices in the wilderness. Déjà vu was a vision of God's eternal scroll. They taught that before birth, every life was written in detail, each step marked by the divine hand. When a man felt déjà vu, it was because he had stumbled upon a line long ago decreed. The recognition was not his, but the glimmer of God's, foreknowledge passing through him. Among the Greeks, philosophers walked marble colonnades and debated the soul's memory, Plato said. Déjà vu was anamnesis, the recalling of eternal truths glimpsed before the soul descended into flesh. When a man beheld a place for the first time, yet felt it already known, it was his soul remembering what it had once known in the realm of forms. Others whispered in the mysteries of Eleusis that déjà vu was the remembrance of the descent into shadow and the promise of return, a cycle every soul must endure. The Romans, inheritors of Greece, gave déjà vu to augury and fate. Augurs declared that when a man felt déjà vu, it was because the gods had revealed the same sign twice, once in heaven and once in the heart. Stoics taught that it was the logos, the divine order, circling endlessly, and the soul bound too. That order felt the repetition as proof of universal law. In the forests of Gaul and Britannia, Druids spoke of spirals carved into stone. Time, they said, was not a line but a winding curve. When a man entered a grove and felt déjà vu, it was because he was walking again upon the same spiral, brushing against his own past. Stones, trees, rivers all bore memory, and when the spirit touched them, déjà vu awoke in the Northlands. Of the Norse, where sagas were carved in ice and sung by firelight, déjà vu was said to be a drop from Mimir's. Well, for beneath the roots of Yggdrasil lay the waters of all memory. When a warrior felt déjà vu in battle, it was because he had tasted unknowingly of that well, and the threads of fate woven by the Norns had crossed his path once more. In the Baltic lands where the sun goddess Sol was honored, déjà vu was the echo of her eternal journey. For Sol returned each day, and so too did the soul. A farmer feeling déjà vu in his fields was reminded that nothing was new beneath the sun's gaze. For her cycle carried all things back upon themselves. Across the steppes of Scythia, horsemen galloped like thunder, and déjà vu was their inheritance of hoofbeats. Warriors said the moment repeated because their ancestors rode with them, their memories pressed into the living blood. To feel déjà vu was to hear the eternal thunder of lineage, carrying every rider back into the charge of his forefathers. And in the far isles of the Pacific, voyagers guided by stars declared that déjà vu was the calling of mana, the sacred power of ancestors. When a sailor set foot on a shore and felt it known, it was because his forefathers had stood there before, and their memory surged through his veins. The ocean carried their remembrance, and déjà vu was its gift to the living dot. Thus across deserts and seas, forests and mountains, temples and hearths, the same shadow returned. Some named it fate, others prophecy, others the whisper of gods, others the cry of ancestors, others the soul's eternal path. But all trembled before it, for déjà vu was the echo of eternity, the proof that man walked not a new road but the same eternal circle, spun and respun forever, in the cradle of Sumer, where reeds bent to the winds of the twin rivers and clay tablets bore the first marks of human thought. The elders said, déjà vu was the voice of Enki rising from the deep. They told that when a shepherd paused in the fields and felt the scene already lived, it was because the god of wisdom had stirred the hidden waters of memory. Time to them was not a forward march, but a tide that returned, and déjà vu was the ripple of that tide breaking against the soul. In Akkad, where kings spoke with pride of empires carved by conquest, scribes whispered that déjà vu was a crack in the firmament, a moment when the world above bent to near the world below. When the crack opened, the memory of eternity seeped into mortal thought, and men believed they had lived the moment before. To the Akkadians, déjà vu was not madness, but a fleeting glimpse of the order of heaven. Among the Elamites, neighbors of Sumer and Etched, déjà vu was tied to the spirits of the ancestors. They taught that the living were bound by invisible cords to those who had walked before. And when a man felt déjà vu, it was the echo of an ancestor's life pressing into his own. The recognition was not his but theirs, woven into him by the endless thread of blood in Canaan, where hilltop altars rose against the sky. Priests said déjà vu was the shadow of prophecy. The gods, they believed, did not speak once, but twice, so that men would not forget. When a moment doubled in the heart, it was because the divine council had already decreed it, and man was only stepping into what had long been spoken in Egypt. Where the Nile renewed the land with its floods, déjà vu was the rising of the Ba, the soul that wandered beyond death. The Egyptians taught that life was a journey repeated, and when déjà vu came, it was the soul stirring with memory of another cycle. A priest in the temple of Karnak might raise his hand to the sacred flame and feel déjà vu, for his spirit had lifted the same hand in the same place 1,000 years before, in Greece. The poets sang of Mnemosyne, goddess of memory, mother. Of the muses, they said, déjà vu was her breath upon the mind, a gift from the well of remembrance. The philosophers spoke of anamnesis, knowledge recalled from before birth, declared that déjà vu was the soul's proof that it had lived beyond the body. The mysteries, initiates believed déjà vu to be the spark of eternity, a sign that they had descended and would rise again as Persephone did each year from the shadowed halls. In Rome, where the augurs lifted their eyes to the sky, déjà vu was an omen. If the gods repeated a sign, then men too must repeat their steps. To the Stoics, déjà vu was confirmation of eternal return, the proof that the universe itself was a wheel forever circling back. When emperors felt déjà vu upon their thrones, they shuddered, for they knew they were only shadows of rulers who had sat there before, and would sit there again when time's wheel turned once more. In the north, the Norse spoke of the Norns, weaving fate at the roots of Yggdrasil. When a man felt déjà vu, it was because his thread had crossed itself upon their loom. Warriors in the shield wall swore that déjà vu was the murmur of destiny, sign that their deeds had already been etched into the sagas long before they lifted their swords. Among the Celts, druids pointed to the spiral carved into ancient stones. They said it was the path of the soul, winding back upon itself in endless circles. When a bard sang a song he had never learned, yet felt déjà vu in every word, it was because his spirit had sung it in another age, echoing through the spiral of time. In the lands of the Maya, where calendars spun like wheels of fire, déjà vu was not mystery, but certainty. The world had been born and destroyed again, and each age mirrored the last. Priest climbing the pyramid steps and struck by déjà vu knew that his spirit had mounted them under another sun in a world now dust. To him, recognition was the memory of the cosmos itself in the Andes. The Inca spoke of Pasha, the weaving of space and time into a single cloth. Déjà vu was the touch of that weaving, the place where the thread folded upon itself. A shepherd, who raised his eyes to the stars and felt déjà vu was not mistaken, he had seen them there before. For the loom had laid them in that pattern, in another turn of the weave. Among the people of the plains, where the sacred hoops circled all life, déjà vu was the proof that the circle returned. To feel a moment repeated was to step once more into the eternal dance, where no life was new and no dream was wasted. And in the dream time of the aboriginal peoples, déjà vu was the song of the first ancestors heard again, for every place was sung into being at the dawn, and when a man felt déjà vu upon a ridge, it was the echo of those first songs resounding within him. Thus, the mystery spanned the earth, clothed in myths of gods and ancestors, fire and water, stars and stone. Yet in every tongue it bore the same shape, the sudden remembrance of what should never be remembered, the haunting return of what should never have been lived. For déjà vu was the voice of eternity, whispering through all ages that time is not a line, but a circle, and that the soul is forever bound to walk it again. Then let the chant bend toward its ending, as a river bends toward the sea, slow and solemn, carrying with it every echo it has gathered across the ages, through deserts where prophets spoke, through temples where priests raised their hands, through forests where shamans beat their drums, through mountains where sages gazed into the stars. The riddle of déjà vu had walked beside humankind. It had been named fate, prophecy, memory, spirit, dream, the whisper of gods, the cry of ancestors, the murmur of earth, the song of fire, the circle of the heavens. Every people clothed it in their own tongue, yet none could escape it. For in every land under every sky, the moment came when the heart trembled, when the soul said, "I have been here before." And so men understood or thought they understood that time was not a spear flung into the void, but a wheel circling forever. They saw that every breath was also an echo, every step a shadow of steps long past, every vision a fragment of eternity glimmering once more. Kings upon their thrones felt it, shepherds upon their fields felt it, warriors in battle and children at play felt it, and all were equal before its haunting touch. The old ones said it was the proof that the soul never dies, but walks through the ages as the moon walks through its phases, waning, waxing, yet ever returning. Others said it was the hand of the gods, reminding man that his life was already written in the script of heaven. Others still said it was the earth itself, alive and ancient, lending its memory to those who trod upon it. And still others whispered it was the soul remembering its own journey through countless lives, circling forever upon the spiral of rebirth. But whatever the name, whatever the belief, the truth remained déjà vu, was the echo of eternity pressing against the fragile present. A moment when the veil parted, and man glimpsed that he was not a creature of one breath, one life, 1 hour but of all breath, all lives, all hours. So the tale circles back upon itself as it was always meant to do. For the story of déjà vu is the same as the thing itself, a repetition, a return, a remembering. The words spoken now are shadows of words spoken long ago, and shadows of words yet to come. The chant has walked through every people, every land, and now it comes to rest. Not with an ending, but with a return to silence, the silence from which it first arose. Then hear the closing hymn, vast as the heavens, solemn as the deep earth, the final turning of the circle. From the first dawn, when humankind opened its eyes beneath the endless sky, the shadow of déjà vu had walked with them. It was in the shepherd who, gazing upon a field, felt he had seen it before. It was in the king who, seated upon his throne, shivered as though he had ruled already in forgotten ages. It was in the child who laughed upon a path never walked, yet knew it as though his feet had traced it long ago. I was in the priest, the prophet, the shaman, the poet, the warrior. No man escaped it, for it was older than kings, older than temples, older than the first fire struck from stone. Some said it was the whisper of gods, the repetition of divine decree. Some said it was the blood of ancestors speaking through the living. Some said it was the fire leaping from age to age, the river flooding and returning, the wheels circling, the stars repeating their paths in heaven. Others said it was the soul itself, wandering through lives without number, brushing against its own footsteps upon the spiral of eternity. And so it became not one belief but many, not one truth but 1,000 masks upon the same face. Yet beneath the masks, the echo was the same, the sudden recognition of what should not be known, the haunting return of what should never have been lived. It was eternity itself touching the fragile moment, reminding man that he was not bound to a single breath, but to the endless circle of all breath, through empires that rose and fell, through temples that blazed and crumbled, through tongues that sang and were silenced, the echo endured. For time devours all, yet time also returns all, and in déjà vu the soul feels the weight of that mystery. It is the serpent devouring its own tail, the sun setting only to rise, the seed falling, only to bloom again, the story ending only to begin anew. Now the chant, having wandered the world, gathers its last strength. It calls together the voices of Sumer and Egypt, of Greece and Rome, of Persia and India, of China and the North, of Maya and Inca, of the forests, deserts, mountains, and seas. It binds them into one great hymn, the hymn of return, and the hymn says all is one, all is circle, all is remembrance. You who live now are not the first to walk your path, nor will you be the last. What you call new has already been, and what has been shall come again. For time is the dream of eternity, and eternity is the soul of all things. So the song falls quiet, not in ending but in return to silence, the silence from which it rose at the dawn of the tale. Yet the silence is not empty, it is filled with the echo of every word, every vision, every memory. It waits for the listener, and when the listener closes their eyes, they too will hear it, the soft voice that says, I have been here before, and thus the great epic closes as it began. Not with a beginning and not with an end, but with the circle eternal, vast and unbroken. The endless whisper of déjà vu, the memory of eternity in the heart of man. Then let the final hymn be sung, not in words of men, but in the voice of eternity itself. The sky folds upon itself like a scroll, and stars fall back into the ocean from which they first were born. The mountains rise and crumble, yet their dust becomes mountains once more. Rivers carve valleys, valleys rise into peaks, peaks sink into seas, yet the water remembers every path. The seed falls into earth, dies and blooms again. The sun sets, only to return clothed in dawn. The serpent devours its tail. The wheel turns without ceasing. The spiral wins into itself forever. So to the soul, it walks and returns, it forgets and remembers, it dies and is reborn. Every step upon the earth is the echo of an older step. Every vision is the shadow of an older flame. When the heart trembles with déjà vu, it is because the soul is brushing against its own eternal reflection, glimpsing itself across the mirror. Of ages the gods whisper, the ancestors sing, the fire crackles, the water murmurs, the stone remembers. All creation is one great memory, and man is its child. Time is not a road, but a circle. Life is not a single breath, but a chorus unending. And in the stillness at the end of the chant, the circle closes. The tale that began in the first dawn now returns to silence. Yet the silence is full of echoes, full of voices, full of eternity itself. And when the listener closes their eyes, they will hear it, the eternal murmur, soft as wind and grass, vast as the sea, deep as the stars.